In October 2022, UK Pivot held a dynamic two-day symposium dubbed Leveling Up. Engaging presenters provided thought-provoking discussions which were life-changing and affirming. Every Friday night for the next 7 weeks, we will be bringing these deep discussions and powerful presentations on health, migration, Brexit, entrepreneurship, and more to you right here on YouTube and on your favorite On Mute Now podcast channel. On this week's episode, we bring you Esther Stanford-Xosei. Among many things, Esther is an activist, lawyer, scholar, community advocate, and decolonial reparationist. Listen to her powerful presentation on Time for Action, Time for Change.
I've been asked to speak on time for action, time for a change. And this is the actual official theme for Black History Month that has been commemorated officially in the UK since 1987. Okay? So just to contextualize my presentation, my bio is up there. It's actually a lot longer, but essentially I am a interdisciplinary scholar, activist, community organizer. I have several professions in that my earlier profession, I trained as a barrister over a couple of decades ago, and I've always done law-related education and training work. I'm now in the process of completing my PhD in history, in African diaspora history in the United Kingdom. And so basically doing the work that I do means that I have to have multiple kind of disciplines that I work with. Essentially, I refer to myself as a jurisconsult. And nobody seems to ever know what a jurisconsult is, but it's basically a specialist lawyer in jurisprudence. And jurisprudence is the science and the philosophy of law. So it's not just about, well, say this act says that or that act says whatever. It's about what is the thinking that goes into legislation and policy? What are the values that are being transmitted? And when we overstand, meaning when we look over, we can realize the difference sometimes between the application of law policy and also being able to meet their intended results. And that is the story of my people of African origin and ancestry. And it is the story, I believe, of all other colonized people. And that includes people within the UK who have been colonized as well. Yeah? And so I'm also a reparationist, and a reparationist is basically somebody who champions the notion of reparations. I'm not sure if people have heard of that term. It's becoming very popular now in public discourse, but it's popular, but it's actually being misrepresented. So reparations is really a cause, it is a purpose, it is a movement of people from communities who are seeking to bring about justice in the present as a result of historical injustices that have happened to that group in the past, but have a continuing effect, okay? And so a reparationist is basically somebody who seeks to bring about repair, because that's the root of the term, reparations. It means repair. Now, in popular consciousness, reparations means financial compensation and paying people money. And that is an aspect of repair, but that is not the root of repair, okay? And actually, a large part of the repair is what's called restitution, which is if something's been taken, if something's been stolen, if a people have been harmed, who would we be had we not gone through particular experiences? And what can we do in our present to try and change not only our present, but our collective futures? our individual and collective futures. So I'm speaking really today just to give some, I think, context to the importance of why Black History Month started, why it's important to people of African ancestry, and that includes African Caribbean people. It includes people who might define themselves as Black British or Scots or Irish or Black Welsh. You know, it's basically a global description. If I just tell you about myself, I was born here in the UK, well, in England specifically. However, my parents were born in the Caribbean. My father, that is, was born in Barbados. My mother was born in South America in a country called Guyana. But through oral history and also doing some DNA tests, I know that my origins are on the continent of Africa. So this notion of Blackness, Africanness is actually quite global. Can't just be reduced to our own basic understandings, okay? So in the month of Black History Month making, we say that Black history is world history. And also, world history is also Black history. What do I mean by that? Well, it is well known that the first humans came out of a continent today that is called Africa and traveled and peopled the planet. So essentially, the bloodlines of people of African ancestry and origin, as well as heritage, run throughout all peoples on planet Earth. Yeah? So when I'm talking about Black history and the importance of it, it's not something that we can just say, this is for people racialized as Black. Yeah? There is also a Black history to the so-called British Isles. And there was a book that was written in 1884 by a Scottish author called David McRitchie called Ancient and Modern Britons. And you might be surprised to discover that many of the ancient Britons were people who were Black. They were called Black. Even terms like Dublin, Dub means Black, darker skinned, hued. And so there is this hidden history that we're constantly grappling with. And I think that's really, really important in the context of Black History Month, and also how we see ourselves. Because what I've observed, you know, having just been on a few calls and so forth, this term that gets used to describe perhaps the others, you know, migrants. Migrants is an interesting term, because who are the migrants? We're all migrants if we go back far enough into our story, meaning our history. We're all migrants. So why do we separate some from others? What is the purpose of doing that? And how long does it take for a migrant community to become recognized as part of the community and the society? Why do we do that othering? And we do that othering because of something called empire. And actually, empire wasn't just about the people racialized as non-white. Empire was also about people racialized as white and different experiences. And this history engulfs all of us and has impacted all of us in terms of who we think we are, and also how we feel we need to relate to the other. And it's all been skewed and distorted. And if we really want to have this leveling up, which I'm not sure it's a term I really like, but since we're using it, the leveling up has to go very, very deep. And that means that we're going to have to suspend some judgments about who we are, who we think we are, and who we think the other is. Because we might be very surprised to discover that there might be some, you know, deeper connections than what we allow ourselves to have. So anyhow, this notion of Black History Month, it began first of all in North America, and especially for people of African ancestry, who had been enslaved, this need to rediscover who we are. Because when you are taught that you have no history apart from slavery, which is obviously a falsehood, it does something to a people's psyche. And so some of our leaders, community organizers, when they were looking at some of the internalized oppression, the negative behavior patterns that people carry on as a result of trauma, intergenerational trauma, it was considered that, well, we need to reconstruct our past so that people can know that we actually had a glorious past, and that the period of enslavement and colonization, even though it was devastating, is only a small aspect of our story. It's a small aspect of our story. And so Black History Month was actually founded by somebody called Carter G. Woodson, as I said, in the United States of America in 1926. And he was of the view that the study of African history or of Black history is a contribution of not only of African people, understanding of themselves, ourselves, but also of humanity, understanding itself. So when we study so-called Black history, we are not only educating people racialized as Black, we are also educating other members of the human family, and in fact all of humanity, as to our origins and our development, or some people might use the term evolution. So as humanity, which we all are, we have a duty to understand ourselves in our fullness, not just in terms of the lenses of those who have constructed empire, the elites from within societies, and that have dominated world history for the past 600 years, okay? Now, Black History Month was adopted in London in October 1987, that's now 35 years ago, as part of something that was called African Jubilee Year, commemorating the centenary of the birth of one of who would be considered the greatest leaders coming out of the Caribbean. And he's somebody called Marcus Mosiah Garvey, was born in Jamaica. And so it was, Marcus Mosiah Garvey, and in fact, his first wife and second wife, Amy Ashwood and Amy Jacques Garvey, and many other people created a movement called Garveyism, yeah? And the idea of Garveyism was a form of what's called Pan-Africanism, which is this notion that irrespective of where we're born, yeah, whether we're born in the British Isles, whether we're born in other parts of Europe, born in the Americas, born in the so-called Caribbean, or on the continent of Africa, that we've got much more in common historically and culturally than we have that divides us. And so when you are a people that have gone through a long period of oppression and dispossession, then it's important for you to find unity or unify with people who have gone through a similar experience. And that was what Pan-Africanism is, and Garveyism was a particular type of Pan-Africanism that also advocated that we were a global people, one people, irrespective of where we were born, and that we had a right to return and have citizenship and belong to our homeland, which is obviously the continent of Africa, irrespective of where we are, just like a Jewish person, as a result of being dispossessed of homeland, has a right to belong to the state of Israel, a similar kind of notion. And we've been commemorating it ever since. Now, the importance of this commemoration and the theme, time for action, time for a change, is really looking at where have we got to. And when I'm thinking about the context of levelling up, especially the very specific political context that it came out of as a response of the UK government's Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities. That was the response. Now, for those who are not familiar with that commission, it was a commission that was developed to look at racism, racial discrimination, other types of disparities between particular, quote unquote, migrant groups, as well as who would be considered the host society, people racialized as white, okay? And there were a number of experts supposedly on this commission. Some from our communities, across, non-white communities, African heritage, African Caribbean, Asian, and some people who basically came up with this notion that there was no more institutional racism in Britain. And one of the people, most controversially, somebody called Dr. Tony Sewell, who's now just been made a lord, as in my view, and in the view of many others in our community, as a payment for actually contributing to this report that denies racism, So when we're talking about this white paper, we have to recognize that context, yeah? That the context is already a faulty context. It's already lacking foundation because there's no race analysis, there's no intersectional analysis in terms of class and gender and all of that, which we know will impact on specific communities' ability to level up within the United Kingdom. And if we also know that the majority of people racialized as non-white live in England, and specifically in London, nearly like 55 or 6%, then actually what's happening to those of you who are outside of that context cannot also be separate from what is happening to people from your own communities, your own countries where maybe your parents or grandparents or whoever came from, whatever identity people hold today, whatever passport people carry. And how we feel that we can level up as these siloed communities who are disconnected from our group power base is just unbelievable. It cannot happen. It just cannot happen. We cannot have so-called equality where there's an unequal playing field. And there is a lack of recognition of how history is still mattering. Now, I speak as somebody, the point about my name, why I have this double-barreled name, and in fact, that's not all of my name. My full name is Esther Stanford-Xosei. And the Xosei bit is a name that I was given in 2008. The Stanford is the family name of my father, and it actually comes from Norfolk. And I have this name because my father's family and my lineage were enslaved in the Caribbean. That's how I have the name Stanford. That's the legacy. So within our bodies, some of us continue and we carry evidence of crimes against our people. That's what it is. And the story is, I was actually planning to get married. And so I said, and the person I was planning to marry had another, what we would call a slave name. And I said to him, look, my slave name's good enough, thank you very much. I'm not taking on another. And so I chose to get an African name, yeah, to reflect my growing consciousness of who I am in my fullness. And that's the name that was given to me, Xosei. It's Eve. It basically means cosmic law and balance. And I've got a legal background. My whole life has been about justice. I knew from 6 years old that I wanted to be a lawyer. Why? Because I knew I was living in a society that had injustice. It wasn't just about race. I was born in the early 1970s, and people spoke a lot more about class then than they do now. So I was always very conscious of not only my so-called racial group, but I was conscious of people across different racial groups who were impoverished in terms of being denied access to our intergenerational wealth, how we had different life chances, how we didn't have access to justice. And I wanted to do something to change that. And that's what's led me to the path of being a reparationist. Now, I think that's important to say because the way in which the reparations discourse has been unfolding, not only in this country and internationally, some people might say it's quite divisive. Yeah? Because it will be framed as, should Black people or African people, Caribbean people get reparations for slavery? And of course, ordinary people will think, well, no, because slavery's ended. It happened a long time ago. It wasn't us. We didn't do it. And equally, some of us, we don't want to be reminded of that past of enslavement, so we focus on being the best that we can be and escaping from this collective stigma and reputation of being enslaved. So there's two things going on here. And then for people racialized as white, there's a tendency to try and shut down these conversations because there's always that, I guess, niggling feeling, that fear that actually you're going to be accused of being racist. And there is something very deep within that is a kind of historical guilt complex that is repressed. And so it's a difficult conversation to have within our communities, but it's also a difficult conversation to have cross-community. But when I speak to you about repair and I explain to you that reparations is not about division, it's about looking at what is the society that we live in today? What are the injustices? Yeah? How have those injustices happened? So even if we take white people, so-called, racialized as white, and I know many people who others might racialize as white, might not racialize yourselves in that way, because that's one of the things that you don't have to do. Because we're living in a society where, quote unquote, you are the norm. You are the dominant group. So you don't actually ever really get the space to explore identity and what it means. What does it mean to be from Northern Ireland? Yeah, how is that different from being Irish? What does it mean to be a Welsh person, a Scottish person? Many people racialized as white don't actually have those kind of explorations and dialogues with self and within communities. And this is where we have this powder keg potentially, because those of us who are considered the migrants and who are othered are constantly having that. We just know we're different. So from our children from 1, 2 years old, especially if they go into an environment where they might be the only child in the nursery or what have you, they know they are different. And also what we're taught in our homes is that you are different. You have to work 10 times harder in order to be seen. So this is the leveling up that we need to address, because this is the cancer that is destroying us and it's destroying our relations. And repair is about also repairing our relations amongst the human family, between different so-called racial or national groups or ethnic groups, but it's also about repairing our relations within groups. And so repair is a framework that is applicable to white people. Yeah? This is what I teach and the people I work with teach. Because I'm interested in Scottish nationalism, Irish nationalism, English. I'm interested in that. I'm interested in notions of who people think they are and what people feel they need to hang on to in order to be whole. And if you are a true respecter of nationhood, of personhood, of community, you will not feel threatened by someone else's expression, even if it's based on distortions of our past. Because it's a way for people to find themselves and locate themselves on the map of human geography. So there's a quote I'm sharing with you now by somebody called Professor John Henrik Clarke, now deceased, but an African-American historian. And he told us, and this is relevant to Black History Month, history is a clock that people use to tell their political and cultural time of day. It is also a compass that people use to find themselves on the map of human geography. History tells a people where they are and what they are. Most importantly, history tells a people where they still must go and what they still must be. The relationship of a history to a people is the same as a mother to a child. So we all need our stories. We all need it. We all need to rediscover, relearn our stories. We all need to deal with the trauma that continues between generations because of different experiences of dispossession. And when I speak about the repair, even though the discourse is always about African people, African Caribbean people, Asian people, or what have you, there's also the case of peoples in the British Isles of repair. The dispossession of people from land is a repair case. What happened to women who were burnt as quote-unquote witches? Because these were the seers, the visionaries, the medicine women who were feared, including white women, right? That is part of the repair. So everyone has their own link and connection into the repair. And repair is a holistic thing, yeah? And repair is also mandated in international law. And a large part of my work is about supporting communities to use international law locally, meaning locally wherever we are, but recognizing that we are not the only ones experiencing what we think we're going through. So today, in all the workshops and discussions where people will be talking about specific experiences and strategies to level up, recognize that that can't just be about what's happening in Northern Ireland. Find the connections as to what's happening across the United Kingdom, but also across the world with people from your group. Yeah? That is what the reparations movements, of which there's not one, but that's what reparations movements are doing. Because that is the only way we're going to really have that true leveling up. And imagine what it feels like to be born in a country where you are racialized as other, but you're supposed to be British. But you're British because your parents were colonial subjects as a result of the British Empire. And then you are dispossessed, you know you're not really considered to be somebody who's native to here. And then when you grow up at school, you're told, go back, they'll say, go back to Africa or whatever. And you're thinking, what do you mean go back to Africa? Where in Africa? And then you do go back to where your parents were born. And when you get there, they say, oh, you're a foreigner, you're English, you're mad. That's what they used to say to me in Barbados. You're mad, oh, you English people are mad. And I'm like, but I'm not English. So who am I then? Who am I? So I consider myself to be an original refugee. Yeah, an original refugee, hundreds of years in the making, because I still don't know who I am. And I remember through oral history, I've told you about my mum's family. Well, she said to me her people came from Ghana. So the first place I went to in Africa was Ghana, because I'm doing a homeland. I'm doing a return now. I'm completing the circle, because there are some castles in Ghana that they call slave forts, where we were trafficked from. And they have these doors that they call the door of no return. So I was the first family, and I continue to be the first member of my family. There's nobody else in my whole family. And I've got a large family across the world that has made that return to Africa. So I went there in 2001, and when I got off the plane, I kissed the ground. I'm like, I'm back, I'm home. And then I'm going through immigration, and there's two lines, and I see the Europeans, people racialized as white, going through, easy, no problem. When I went to go through, I'm being stopped, I'm being questioned, I'm being asked all these, and then I'm being called a brony, which in that language means like foreigner, but it actually means a white person. So they're calling me a white person, right? And I'm thinking, I'm not a white person. So this is why I champion repair, because it's experiences like that. And I'm not sure what's happening in Northern Ireland, but I can tell you in England, what's happening with many of our children, African Caribbean children, African children, gun and knife crime. Why is this happening? People are killing each other over turf, postcode lotteries, because of what they call their ends, whether it's a council estate or whatever, that they're saying is theirs. How has this happened? And this is not just an issue that's affecting us, it affects other communities well, because there are also similar patterns, but for different reasons. So what's happening to our children and our grandchildren is an indicator of the harm, the damage that still persists, that we refer to as African reparationists in the Kiswahili tongue as the maangamizi, which basically means like you can't translate it in English, but if I were to use an English term, I would say African Holocaust, yeah? But we use the term African Holocaust, and there's, some of you will know of somebody called Akala, very famous, you know, he's not just a rapper, I mean, he's a true scholar, activist, intellectual, you know, person, but he wrote a song called Maangamizi, and that song really speaks to this experience. And he wrote that song as a result of being on a course that I teach about it. And I said, I particularly attracted artists, and I said, please put these messages into song, into creativity, because they're hard messages to really carry. And we've got to find a way to get this into people's popular consciousness. But the vision of repair that we're working with is really a vision that is not about the division. It's not about putting one community against another, yeah, in this competition for what people will think are finite resources. But actually what we know, and that's why it's not only good to know your story, it's also good to know the story of other people's, the history. I just prefer to use the term our story because it's more inclusive to just being his story or her story. Yeah? It's important for us, especially when we come somewhere, to know the stories of those who are, quote unquote, the settled host community. Yeah? It works both ways. Yeah? We need to learn each other's stories. Because what we often find is that there'll be similar experiences. They're not the same, but it's in the similarities that we can find some kind of cohesion. What is it that we have in common? We know what we have that separates us. We live with that every day. But what is it that we have in common? What are the values that we share in common that are not based on assimilation and saying you can't be free to be who you are? You can be who you are. And maybe there's a way that you inhabit the earth in terms of your identity, and you might use a particular term to describe something that another people might describe in a different way. And that's okay. So the vision that some of us as African reparationists have is really around building communities, repairing relations, yeah? And actually the true reparations is about rebuilding community. Because everything that we're facing, yeah? We're talking about cost of living crisis, austerity, different words get used, but if you've been on the planet long enough, and now I've been on the planet, I can say in December, 50 years, then you know that these terms come and go. The experiences stay the same, but there's a new policy paper, some new expert, yeah? But the only way we get through anything is by community, building community. And community is not one thing. Community is what we make it to be. And some of us are part of multiple communities, and that's okay as well. But the people that are governing this planet and the people that are supposedly governing this country don't care about ordinary people like you and me. It's the communities. It is the mutual aid and networks that we develop. That was really epitomized with COVID, the pandemic. How people went back to doing that because we had to. People went back into building families, the root of the basis of community, however we define family. This is the repair, repairing our communities. Because we all then can have a role and we can share in what this repair looks like. And so that is why, as reparationists, we are fashioning a process in the UK that we're calling the All-Party Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry for Truth and Reparatory Justice. Now, the levelling up for me is we don't have anyone in Northern Ireland who is really part of this. Now, as a result of this approach to organising, understanding the complexities of community and nation and what that means in the context of a united, disunited kingdom, we have been able to not only develop allies amongst elected officials, but also white-led movements, such as the environmental movements, such as groups like Extinction Rebellion, who are concerned with our common home. Yeah, our common home, which is Mother Earth. Yeah, the climate and ecological crisis. We're seeing manifestations of that here in the British Isles. If you live in certain parts of this country, shorelines are disappearing. Yeah, we've had a heat wave in the summer. Unprecedented. So these big polycrises, these multiple issues that are global issues, it's not going to be governments that are going to be fixing this. It's going to be communities who are going to have, we're going to have to go back to growing our own food, being again on the land. But what does that mean when you are dispossessed of land and you have been here for hundreds of years? What does that mean? Yeah? What does it mean that Queen Elizabeth II just passed was the world's largest landowner with legal title to 1/6 of planet Earth? What does that mean? What does it mean when people, because they've been dispossessed, go on to dispossess other people of their right to belong to a specific part of the earth and to extract the resources, which are now poisoning water bodies, poisoning our food systems, the toxicity? What does that mean? That is the harm that we are called on to repair together. That is the levelling up. Yeah, and the levelling up cannot be produced out of a vision of elites. It cannot be. The levelling up can only come from the ground up because we know the realities that we're facing as individuals, as communities, as people who share multiple communities in terms of dual heritage, etc., etc. This is part of our historic mission and duty. And this is, for me, what I feel the message of Black History Month offers, not only to quote-unquote Black people, but what it offers to the rest of humanity, what it offers to you. Can we find this path together? Can we have this dialogue about not only what makes you, you, but what makes me, me? Can we find a way to exist, to coexist together? That is really the question. That is the big question. Reparations is about world making, community building, but it is also a re-civilizational project. Yeah? Because injustice dehumanizes. It dehumanizes the oppressed, but it also dehumanizes the quote-unquote oppressor. Yeah? And we all have to find our way back to home, whatever home means to us. And if we realize that our common home is Earth, Mother Earth, then that should provide some guidance on how we should relate to each other as children of the earth. Yeah? Because our Mother Earth has enough to sustain all of us. There's no competition. There's no finite resources. There's no finite water. It's because corporations are privatizing it, including here. That why our bills, why do we have this energy crisis? Why? When there's untold sources of renewable energy. What is the mindset that we have? What are the governance systems that we are introducing? What is our vision of the society? In 1492, somebody called Christopher Columbus, working in terms of the Pope, the Vatican, the Pope of Rome, goes around the world supposedly discovering people that existed, for millennia before. And that set in motion this process of, quote unquote, a new world. And the cost of that new world was massive death, destruction, genocide, ecocide, the killing of our environment, our Mother Earth, and our ecosystems, our life support systems. Now, can we, this 531 years plus later, also refashion a new world? Can we do that? When we know the carnage that it has left. We have to do that because those people that are responsible for this condition, and let's remember then when I talk about enslavement, you should know, but in case some of you don't know, in 1837, there was something called the Slave Compensation Act that was passed in the British Houses of Parliament, where enslavers were compensated for the loss of their quote-unquote property in my people, your people. And our people in the Caribbean and other parts of the world got nothing. Yeah, nothing. And in fact, they had to pay towards that compensation. And it was something called apprenticeship, where even after so-called abolition in 1833, people had to still work 6 to 8 years for free, including 4-year-old children. Yeah? But when we know that story, we also know there are similarities with what happened in Victorian England, with children in this country having to go into mines, go up chimneys, and so forth. So we can find those commonalities in experiences of dispossession. And when I mentioned this compensation that went to enslavers, at the time, £47 million, it was only paid off. It was 40% of the national debt in 1837, and it was only paid off in 2015. That meant my parents, myself, my family members were also contributing in terms of paying taxes to repaying a loan that was taken out to pay enslavers. That is the dehumanization that we are forced to live with on the condition of being able to belong in this society. And then you wonder why some of us go crazy. And we internalize that violence so much that we then take it out on ourselves. Because where can we express that rage? If you are human, would you accept that if that happened to you and your family? But the price of acceptance for some of us is don't say about it, don't talk about it, move on. The British government, when every year we hand in a petition that's calling for our reparations processes, can we have this commission of inquiry? Because we want to talk to the wider public, not just ourselves. We know what we're saying. It's the wider public that doesn't get it and thinks, well, why they always get that, but you get aid. But actually every $1 or £1 in aid, 24 is taken back out. People don't know these things. Yeah? And we're saying we want to have a dialogue, not only with the British state, but the society. We want to talk. We want to really ground, as we would say, to ground, to be earthed with you. We want to have that. And the British state says, when we send these petitions in, we do not believe that reparations are the answer. Now, bearing in mind, we're not saying to them, pay us 777 trillion pounds. We're saying repair is about all these things I've spoken about. It's holistic, it's community. It fits with all these policies on community building, civil renewal, community cohesion. We can use all the terms. They shut it down. No, we don't want to talk about it. And in fact, what they then tell us is, well, your people in Africa and the Caribbean are doing very well. We've given lots of MBEs and OBEs to some of you, so you should be more or less happy with that. Happy with empire. And some of us, because we have memory of who we were, which is the history, our story, we can never accept that. And that's not just a black thing. There are many other people, even racialized as white, who turn down these so-called honors. Yeah? That's what the government tells us. They tell us they're not interested. And so what we then were able to do is, because a lot of us are also environmentalists, I've been involved with the Extinction Rebellion, from when it formed, and co-founded something called the Extinction Rebellion Internationalist Solidarity Network, because we wanted to find who are the rebel communities in Britain? Who are those engaged in resisting state imposition? Who are those who care about Mother Earth? Who are those who want to go back to living in community? And we found that amongst a lot of environmentalists. I mean, there's lots of issues, don't get me wrong. There's always issues when you're working with other people across differences of time and differences of personality and differences of culture and differences of class and all those things and gender and sex and all of that. But we struggle together because we know that we have a similar vision of the need to stop the harm today, to hold those accountable that are dispossessing all of us, and also to repair that harm. And so for us, we see this repaired world as, we call it Ubuntu Dunia. And that's really, Ubuntu is a Southern African notion. It's like an African humanism coming out of the Bantu-speaking peoples of West Africa, where you basically recognize that you cannot, in the teaching of Ubuntu, Ubuntu is not just about, you're not a human when you're just born in a community. You are only human when you express that humanity to others outside of your community. That's what makes us human. So when we're born, we're like humans in the making, because we have to overcome, all kinds of the natural urges for competition. We have to learn how to share and all these things. Just like if you watch a baby, if you leave a baby can act quite savage sometimes. If you don't cultivate and teach that child around how to do things, yeah? And so Ubuntu is that. It is really the humanity that we show each other that we have to rediscover. And Dunia just is a term, an Nguni term, for a multipolar world of global justice for all. So our repair cannot happen at the expense of other people. But what we want to do is catalyze our repair in a way that it also energizes you to continue doing that repair work in your own community. Yeah? That's what it's about. And that, for me, when we're talking about time for a change, time for action, yes, we can look at that as the elites and the governments and the council and the this and the that, where the power is outside of us. But we can also look at it in terms of the power that we have. The power that we have to be the change. Can you be that change? That is a question only you can answer. Thank you.